Hey guys, I'm Jesse. Welcome to Anthem Online. We're really glad that you're here with us today. We're in the second to last week of our series called Fruitful, and the sermon today is going to be on gentleness. So before we get to all of that, we just have a few cool things that are coming up. On May 14, we have our Nurses Appreciation Sabbath. And then also this week, our liturgy that we've talked about in the weeks previous to this is on community and giving. And if you want to do that and participate in that yourself, tune in Wednesday on our social media accounts where you will see us post about that so you can be part of that yourself. And then on top of that, we got grad season around the corner, just a lot of cool stuff coming up in this season for Anthem. And if you want to be part of that, we want you to show up in person. You can keep tuning in online. However you're part of it, it's really going to be a cool time. So I guess let's just get to the service.
God of Abraham, you're the God of covenant, of faithful promises. And time again, you have proven you do just what you say. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. You are God from age to age, and though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Oh, your history can prove there's nothing you can't do. You're faithful and true. And though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. And I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the my hope and firm foundation. 'Cause I put my faith in. Do you believe it? He anchors my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. And I put my faith in Jesus. He's my anchor to the ground, and my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me. Are you ready tonight? 'Cause I put my faith in Jesus. My anchor to the ground, my hope
On a scale of 1 to 10, how gentle do you feel?
I'm like really tired, so probably I'm gonna go with 5.
5.
On a good day, it would be more, but
I feel like a 7. I feel pretty darn gentle right now. Too anointed to be disappointed.
We're about to worship, so it has to be a 7.
Got it. I love that. How gentle do you feel right here, right now?
Oh, hella. Not kidding. I don't know. I have repressed Adventist rage, so probably an 8.
I'm going to put it up there at 9.5. I never give anybody a 10.
Oh, man. I'm topping out at probably like a 2.5. I'm not a normally gentle person. I have many strengths. Gentleness is not listed among those.
A 9.
That's very gentle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to hurt anyone.
Please be gentle with.
My kids.
I love that. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Please be gentle with.
My car.
Has someone not been gentle with your car?
No, they're usually pretty good, but you know.
Please be gentle with.
Me.
Me.
me?
Me.
Me.
Who hurt you?
My heart.
My Play-Doh? I don't know. You form something nice and then someone ruins it.
My dog.
I love dogs. What kind of dog do you have?
Have a little corgi.
Oh my goodness. Please be gentle with.
My shins.
Your shins. You know, it sounds like a childhood story that we do not have time, but thank you, Josh. Oh my goodness. Please be gentle with.
My new members here at Anthem Church.
Okay, this man is like being paid for marketing.
It's a brutal story. Because anytime gentleness and ferocity collide, it's brutal. And I was there to see it. So first, a bit of background. Maya was our dog. Actually, Maya was our daughter's dog until she left for college, and then we inherited her. So Maya was a mix. She was part Labrador, part Poodle, part Barbet, French water dog. She was a very gentle dog. She was always a bit standoffish, a bit shy, didn't come right out and get involved. Whenever dogs were playing, she was there. She wanted to be part of it, but wanted to be a little bit in the background. So I want to show you just a real quick clip of Maya out in the park with our son-in-law, Matthew. So this is an example of Maya running and playing with other dogs, and you'll see that she just kind of holds back. She's the black dog there you see in the back. The other dogs are always the ones that were active and wrestling. She was the one that was a little bit on the outside. One year and 2 Friday nights ago, I was walking Maya. It's late afternoon. It was getting close to sundown. It was in our neighborhood. Maya and I were on the way home. She was kind of walking just a tad bit behind me. Familiar route we'd walked hundreds, thousands of times. I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly what I heard, but I heard something, and so I turned around. And there, about 10 to 12 yards away, was a pit bull in full attack mode, coming like a torpedo at Maya. I reacted as quickly as I could. I tried to jerk Maya around with her leash, get her behind me, but it was to no avail. The pit bull latched on. I kicked until I could kick no more, and it made no difference. There is a point in time where I just kind of went blank. I do not have memory of what happened. I can tell you the last thing I remember was Maya looking at me, trying to lunge for me as though to say, "Help me." And then I go blank. The next thing I remember, I was on top of the pit bull, on the street, trying to keep my weight on the dog and grabbing it around the neck, trying to squeeze the life out of it. I didn't see Maya anywhere. Later, I found she was in the street behind me, dying. I was on top of that pit bull over 20 minutes. People drove by. Finally, a couple of men stopped to help. A woman stopped and called my wife. Just to give you an idea, we live in North Redlands. My wife was at Costco. She finished checking out, loaded the dirt for gardening into the car, drove home, unloaded it because she knew we would need it for Maya, and drove out to where I was. And I was still on top of that dog. There were 3 police cars, several police officers, and some bystanders by now. A few minutes after that, ferocity got up and walked away as gentleness lay dying in the street. I've had a lot of thoughts about that. Honestly, that's not true. It has haunted me. That's true. There are a lot of things I could say. I only want to say one, and it is this. When ferocity and gentleness collide, gentleness always loses. You don't have to look far to determine that. Leading up to this, I did a lot of looking. Internet, files on my computer, books, a lot of looking for examples of gentleness being celebrated in our culture. It was a tough, dry journey. But looking for examples of violence and ferocity and aggression and anger, that doesn't take long. Take, for example, the public square. What happens in our so-called dialogue? Ronald Kernahan, theologian, pastor, writes this: at the beginning of the 21st century, reasoned discourse is imperiled. Hardball is the dominant, reasoned discourse is increasingly given away to in-your-face sound bites. Hardball is the dominant metaphor for American public life. Our interchanges are confrontational, divisive, and dismissive. Truth is not something we expect to emerge from a conversation. It is something we hope to impose. Balance and fairness are casualties on evening shows as 2, 3, and sometimes 4 voices contend simultaneously for dominance. Volume and intransigence are the new civic virtues. And we say, well, yeah, it's been an extremely contentious political time these recent years, and these last 2 years of pandemic haven't helped. And then we look down in the right-hand corner and realize Kernahan wrote that in 2003. It's only getting worse. And in that context, we ask, who wants to be gentle? Everybody's yelling. Who wants to be gentle? Gentleness always loses. Or take what happens when we get behind the wheel of a car. AAA sponsored a study recently, several years ago actually, in which they asked many drivers, they studied many drivers, and at the end of their study had some very disturbing results. 80% of American drivers reported in the last year having instances in which they felt what was described as extreme anger or aggression, and many said, I got involved in some kind of a road rage incident. 8 million drivers said, I followed through on my road rage in some way, including banging the other car and getting out to confront the other driver. A friend and I were driving up the 91 freeway. We came to where you merge onto the 10 eastbound. As we merged onto the 10, suddenly 2 cars came screaming up eastbound. First, we thought they were racing each other, and then we realized one was trying to cut the other off, probably because that one had cut him off. The one who was trying to stay ahead pulled up and stopped and slowed down very suddenly behind a slow-moving car, so there was no room to get in. And right in front of us, the driver who was chasing him just began to smash the car, rolling over, and these 2 cars ramming each other on the way down 1.5 miles from here. chrome, glass, mirror flying all over the highway. And then they shot off to the shoulder, and I said, take the exit. I didn't want to be a victim of something because we were too close. Who wants to be gentle? Gentleness always loses. It's everywhere we look. It's in sports. You see it all the time in sports. Read a story this week, a man named Keith Mans from Michigan described going to his daughter's soccer game. You see, the other team had a really good player. She was their lead player. She was weaving between all the players. She's the one that kept scoring. She is the reason, said Mans, that our team lost. But there was the coach on the other side, he said, who just kept yelling and shouting and screaming all through the game at that girl. What I didn't know, said Mans, until the game was over, when I talked to my daughter said, Dad, that girl cried through the whole game. Because that coach is her father. Who wants to be gentle? We got to win this game. It's not real new either. Niccolò Machiavelli, Renaissance man, political thinker whose theories continue to influence political thought to this very day. I want to read you a summary of something that was said on a YouTube called The School of Life that summarizes some of Machiavelli's thoughts. Machiavelli believed that to be effective, political leaders needed to be ruthless and tyrannical, not empathetic and just. His book, The Prince, is a short manual of advice for princes on how not to finish last. And the answer was never to be overly devoted to acting nicely and to know how to borrow every single trick employed by the most dastardly, unscrupulous, and nastiest people who have ever lived. Machiavelli knew where our counterproductive obsession with acting nicely originated from. The West was brought up on the Christian story of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was the very nice man from Galilee who always treated people well. But Machiavelli pointed out an inconvenient detail to this sentimental tale of the triumph of goodness through meekness. From a practical perspective, Jesus' life was an outright disaster. This gentle soul was trampled upon and humiliated, disregarded and mocked, judged in his lifetime, and outside of any divine assistance, he was one of history's greatest losers. Who wants to be gentle? Nice guys finish last. In the collision between ferocity and gentleness, gentleness always loses. But there's a problem. Because for some of us, maybe many of us, and countless others beyond this room, history's greatest loser tapped us on the shoulder and said to us, "Follow me." And as we begin to put our footsteps in his footprints, we begin to realize where he was leading us. One of those destinations is a virtue called gentleness. I mean, he said it of himself in what to me is one of my favorite passages from the Gospels. In the book Desire of Ages, an entire chapter is devoted to this little 3-word passage. The name of the chapter is The Invitation. It's in Matthew 11 when Jesus stands up and says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Gentle. So when he tapped us on the shoulder and invited us to follow him, that's part of where he's leading. It's troublesome, is it not? Who wants to be a wilting wallflower? Who wants to be a limp milquetoast? Who wants to be on the side that always loses? Who wants to be gentle? Well, apparently Paul. Because Paul was one of those on whose shoulder Jesus tapped, blinded him, said, "Follow me." So in that process, Paul did. And he sat down and he put quill, pen to parchment, and he wrote letters. He wrote epistles, one of which was the epistle to the Galatians, which actually was one of his most scalding letters. There in that letter, he uses the word that Jesus used when Jesus says, "For I am gentle." He used a word, the same word group that Paul uses. Paul uses it twice in his letter to the Galatians. Once when he says in Galatians 6:1, "If somebody falls, restore that person gently." He draws on a medical image from his day of resetting a bone. Be gentle, he says. But he uses it in one other place. And it is that place which has been our home base of operations throughout this series called Fruitful. Here's what it says, Galatians 5:22. "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." That last brief sentence we'll talk about next week. But what our focus is today is the second to last virtue called gentleness. Who wants to be gentle? Gentleness will get you killed. Who wants to be gentle? Especially when we think about what the meaning of the Greek word is, because we do want to ask, what might Paul have had in mind when he listed this as one of the virtues? William Mounce, a New Testament scholar who helps us a lot with the meaning of original languages, says this: gentleness, meaning the original Greek word, gentleness means to approach others, including one's enemies, in a humble and caring spirit, not using force to get one's way. Who wants to be gentle? Even when we read it about Jesus, where he says, "I am gentle and humble in heart," or as the King James Version renders it, "I am meek." Say meek. Meekness is weakness. Who wants that? But you have to follow and keep following Jesus. And keep watching Jesus. Because if you follow him onto the temple grounds, you will see him there standing in regal dignity with a whip in his hand, surveying the scene before him as the merchants and the money changers bilk the poor out of their money and line their own pockets. You have to listen as Jesus' eyes flash fire and as his voice echoes through the temple and he says to them, "Take these things out." And you have to watch the look on the faces of those utterly terrified money grubbers as they flee from his presence. Gentle, velvet hand, steel spine. You have to listen. How long has it been since you read Matthew 23? Matthew 23, where he excoriates the religious leadership of his day. Hypocrites, he calls them. Not for one verse or 2 or 5 or 10. The entire chapter, he goes on and on. Scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You can feel the heat emanating from him as those leaders cower from his presence. Gentle. You got to keep following him. Because when Jesus says, "I am gentle and humble in heart," you soon conclude, I cannot equate that with weakness. Which forces us then to ask a question. If that's the case, if that's true, then is it true that gentleness always loses? If that's who Jesus is, if meekness does not equal weakness, does gentleness always lose? There are some reasons to consider that maybe that statement needs to be adjusted. For example, reading from the pen of Dave Robson or the computer of Dave Robson in BBC Future, Robson writes this: nonviolent protests are twice as likely to succeed as armed conflicts. Those engaging a threshold of 3.5% of the population have never failed to bring about change. You get 3.5% of a population, peaceful protest, change comes. He continues. The singing revolution in Estonia, they protested by singing. The Rose Revolution in Georgia protested by bringing red roses. Along with others are given as examples of successful protests that resulted in serious change. Not only are peaceful protests more ethical than violent protests, but they are also more likely to gain the popular support needed. Does the name Martin Luther King ring any bells? We will, in non-violent fashion, change the world, which he proceeded to lead. I don't know. I don't know if it's right then to say gentleness always loses. We might want to rethink that. Even on a personal level. Quite some years ago now, our family of four was traveling together. We were at the ticket counter. The agent behind the ticket counter said to us, "We're going to upgrade you to first class." I was like, giddy up. And he said, "So here are 2 upgrades to first class." What are you, some kind of agent of Satan? Trying to tear our family apart? What do you mean 2? We got 2. So now what are we going to do? I mean, it seemed fairly clear to me that I should be one of those up there, right? So we talked about, well, we can't really take Miranda up there because she's still a babe in arms and she has a hard time flying. It hurts her ears. She'll cry a lot. That'll never go in first class. Austin's older, he can do it. So probably we can't put both of them up there or back there, so 1 in each. And now we got to decide. Baby, I love you so much, but don't you understand? So here I am back in coach with Miranda. We get seated on our row almost at the back of the plane. And the plane is starting to fill up because, we got to board with first class, except we turned right instead of left. And as I'm sitting there getting her arranged in this seat, here comes a woman down the aisle. Just to look at her, you'd say she's successful, she's on top of it, she's climbing the ladder, she's well put together and looks professional, all the rest. She came, she went into the row right ahead of me, looked over the seat, saw Miranda and said, "Oh my," out loud and strong, and slammed her briefcase down and sat down and said, "Please don't let that kid cry." And I thought, oh my goodness. So once the plane starts to climb and the ears start to hurt, Miranda began to cry. Not cry, scream. And I'm doing everything I can think of try to somehow get through this. Loud, it's echoing through all of the plane, it felt like to me. People turning, looking, what are you doing to that baby? All of this going on. And the lady in front of me jerking up and looking back and looking daggers. Make her be quiet. I finally got up and started walking the aisle to see if that would help and at least spread some of the joy. I finally went into the bathroom, shut the door. I thought maybe that you want to hear something piercing? Shut yourself in a small bathroom with a screaming baby. That didn't last long. I went out. By now, literally, I was almost in tears. I could feel the daggers of everyone in that section on me, and especially that one woman. And then, another woman seated on the aisle just across from me got up, walked over to me, kind of put her arm around me, and said, "Pay her no mind. We're all fine. So's your baby." I said, "Can you hold me?" I still glow when I think of that. Just that kind, gentle act. And it makes me think, maybe gentleness doesn't always lose. Maybe it was that story that made me pay attention to the story told by Gordon MacDonald, the well-known writer and speaker. MacDonald was traveling from Boston's Logan Airport to LAX. He got to the airline ticket counter and showed his ticket, getting ready to board, and the lady looked at him and said, "Mr. MacDonald, you're at the wrong airport." He said, "What?" He looked at his ticket, and sure enough, he had forgotten. Because of the price, no doubt, he had bought his flight from another area airport. And he said, "Oh my goodness, I can't get there now. Can you not get me on this flight?" And she said, "Sure, we can." And so she's typing for a bit. She looked up and she said, "That'll be $360. And he said, "What? $360? What are you talking about?" And then all these things went on in his mind. He said, "I'm going to lash out at her. I'm going to rip into her. I'm going to hurt her like I'm hurting right now. Maybe she'll hurt enough to tell the company, tell the CEO about their friendly skies and all of this stuff." He said, "I was just ready to lash out and lash into her, and I remembered something. I remembered a friend of mine who was involved in a very contentious and painful church conflict. He and I had been talking about it a few days before, and my friend told me that someone wise had approached him and had simply said to him, 'Somebody has to do the dignified thing here.' And as I read MacDonald's story, I thought, dignity, dignified, that's gentleness. That's what he's talking about. So I want to read to you in MacDonald's own words what happened next. "I said to the boarding pass lady, now desperate because he had to get on the flight, 'Before I pay you the $360, he's thinking, do the dignified thing, let me say one more thing. 6 weeks ago, I came here to take a flight to the West Coast and discovered that the airline had canceled the flight and hadn't told me. They said they were sorry, and I forgave them. Then 2 weeks later, on a flight to Europe, the airline lost my luggage for 2 days. They said they were really, really sorry, and again, I forgave them. Last week, on a third flight, they got me to my destination 2 hours late. Your people fell all over themselves saying how sorry they were about the delays. And you know what? I forgave them. Now here I am, 4th time in 6 weeks, wanting to fly with you again. See how forgiving I am? But this morning, the problem's mine. I forgot that I scheduled myself out of the other airport, and I'm really, really sorry about that terrible mistake. You guys have said sorry to me 3 times in the last 6 weeks, and each time I have forgiven you. Now I would like to say sorry to you and ask you to forgive me and put me on that flight without charging me $360. You have said 3 sorries, and I'm asking for one. Does that make any sense to you? The boarding pass lady took her own time out and considered my idea. And then said, it really does make sense to me. Let me see what I can do. She typed and typed and typed into her computer. I think she was writing a novella. And then she looked up with a smile and said, we can do this. 2 minutes later, I was off to the gate with my boarding pass. That morning, dignity, gentleness, won. The airline forgave me. The skies were indeed friendly. And I didn't have to pay an additional $360. And then he closes with these words. This increasingly crowded, noisy world is generating more and more of these kinds of moments where no one is really doing anything bad, just stupid, me in this case, but because our human dignity is eroded by these constant clashes, even our innocent mistakes point to the possibility for hateful exchanges and vengeful acts. You have to keep alert lest you get sucked into it and say and do things you'll regret an hour later. And I read it. And I thought, maybe gentleness doesn't always lose. So Jesus tapped you on the shoulder. Said, come and follow me. And as you followed him, you realized, wait a second. He's leading me in the direction of becoming a more gentle person. Who wants to be gentle? In fact, maybe he's leading you in the direction of becoming more gentle in the most important relationships of your life. A parent, a child, a brother, a sister, a husband, a wife. Gentleness. Years ago, I attended the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy conference in Washington, D.C. There were thousands of us as marriage and family therapists there. One of the plenary sessions was delivered by one of the leading researchers and theorists in the field. I can still remember that day being in this vast hall with all these other marriage and family therapists listening to him present. He had stellar tickets, and he talked about the research in which they were engaged, what it was that they were doing. And then, not a man of faith as far as I knew, as he came to the end of his presentation, he kind of paused. And he rather thoughtfully said this, you know, after all this research we've done, after all these couples that we have seen, after all of these families we have counseled, I've come to this conclusion. Most of the problems in our families come simply from the way we talk to each other. Suppose you went to his office for counseling. You walk in with your spouse, you see the diplomas on the wall, you see the awards on the shelf, you see the magazine covers that feature his articles, you see the honors, the societies of which he's a member, and you're thinking, okay, this is good. This guy can help us. And he spends most of that session asking questions and listening to you unpack what's going on in your family. And at the end of it, he says this, you know what you all need to do? You all need to be kind to each other. Gentle. You say, what are you talking about? I could have got that out of my Bible. What am I paying you for? You know what he might say? I don't know anything about your Bible. That's not my thing. But I can tell you, you see all of this? All of this has taught me one thing. Be kind. Be gentle. And it'll change your world. So I don't know. Maybe gentleness doesn't always lose. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness. Jesus, make me a more gentle person. Amen.
Hey guys, that was a great sermon on gentleness. Tune in next week for our last sermon in this series on self-control. If you want to help support Anthem and the Loma Linda University Church at large, you can give online. There's 2 ways to give. Text the number on the screen or go to luc.org/give. That's how you can help support this place. If you want to come next week and tune in next week, we would love to have you. We'll see you then.